Welcome to Conversation with Shreya. In the previous episode of Med School Unfiltered, we discussed about the life of an MBBS student. And we had Dr. Shruti with us on the podcast. And if you haven't watched that episode, the link is in the description. Please do check it out. Today we are going to take it one step further and we are going to discuss the life of a resident surgeon. Joining me is Dr. Amulya. Hi, Dr. Amulya. She's a consulting cardiothoracic surgeon from Bangalore. So let's get started. So, Dr. Amulya, what drew you towards medicine and eventually surgery?
There's no specific point at which I remember being drawn towards medicine. I do remember, however, in school being fascinated by biology, human biology to be specific. I think at that point I just decided that medicine would be the right choice for me. We did have career counselors. I had a very nice biology teacher who guided me the right way. I think I would attribute all of it to that as to why I chose medicine as a field. To add to why I chose surgery, I was always someone who loved doing things with my hand. Whether it's fixing something, repairing something, stitching something. These are all activities I did as a child. That just translated into picking surgery. It was a natural choice.
Interesting. I have a follow-up question to that. I may be digressing a bit, but what distinguishes surgery from medicine? I think often students have this question, and when they are at a point where they have to make a choice after MBBS. So, what is that one distinguishing factor?
Let's be clear. It's not as simple as medicine and surgery. There are certain subjects that teach you these surgical sciences, which involves learning the techniques of operating. It could be on different parts of the body. To begin with, we have general surgery, where it addresses all the parts of the body.
Right.
Otherwise, you have ophthalmology, which addresses only the eye. You have ENT, which addresses only the ear, the nose, and the throat. So it depends on which part of the body you are surgically correcting. Similarly, with medicine, it is learning the body as a whole. They do understand the intricacies of surgical sciences also. It's not that they don't involve themselves in surgery, but they probably don't operate the way we do. That's the only difference. But I wouldn't say that medicine and surgery is so different. They are intertwined. It's about whether you are fixing it by hand or fixing it with your brain. It's as simple as that.
Okay, so at what point did you decide you wanted to take up cardiothoracic surgery? It's a very niche and a demanding field.
It's a funny story. Okay, at some point during 8th standard in school, I decided that I wanted to do exactly that. I know it sounds far-fetched and nobody believes me, but that is when I decided that I'm not just going to take medicine, I'm not just going to take surgery in the medical field, but I am specifically going to take cardiothoracic surgery. If you ask me why I chose it, I do not remember. Maybe I saw an article about Devi Shetty and that's how I came about it, but I cannot distinctly remember. That's all I ever wanted, and I made sure that I worked towards that goal no matter what, and I got it.
For PG, you would have taken up NEET PG exam. Did you have NEET PG at the time when you finished your MBBS?
Actually, the first time that I wrote the entrance exams for post-graduation, it was All India PG entrance exam. It was a different entrance exam, different format completely. Those did not include all the colleges. They gave us an All India rank, using which we could enter certain colleges in that category. However, the states conducted their own entrance exams. The individual deemed colleges had their own entrance exams. However, the year after that, when I reattempted it, because I didn't get the rank I want, I reattempted the exam. That time it became NEET PG. So NEET PG had encompassed all the colleges across India, and the state counseling boards used the rank just to conduct counseling. So we did not have multiple exams. That made life very easy for us. Unfortunately for us, we were not mentally prepared to write an exam of a different format. That aside, we didn't have to run to multiple states to give entrance exams. We didn't have to attend multiple counselings. That made life very easy. So NEET is definitely beneficial in that regard.
The preparation for NEET PG, how did the preparation for NEET PG look like? And I know that the subjects are different for pre-medical examination for MBBS and for NEET PG. So how was it different?
So for MBBS, when we are entering, they are only looking at your basic aptitude. That is physics, chemistry, biology is all they're going to check.
Right.
And in reality, that's all you can check, because after 12th standard, you have only studied that much. So they're only seeing if you're fit to enter medical school. Aside from that, when we're preparing for NEET PG, and this I'm referring to both prior to my surgical degree as well as my super specialty degree. The preparation is specifically in those subjects. However, the questions are asked across the board. Now, if I am attempting to get a surgical seat, it doesn't mean I answer questions only in that. So for NEET PG preparation, you need to be well versed in all the subjects, which we learn in MBBS. So every step, every entrance exam you give is testing whether what you've done so far, you have done well. So in MBBS, they check physics, chemistry, biology. Whereas in PG, they will check if you have done community medicine, general surgery, orthopedics. They check everything under the sun. However, when it comes to super specialty, they do ask majority of the questions in general surgery, but there is a big portion of it that asks questions in the subject you have chosen. So I have chosen cardiothoracic surgery. The questions will be limited to that.
Looking back, what are some of the common mistakes that aspirants make during their MBBS or while preparing for their PG?
I don't think you can say that there are any mistakes per se. Everybody has their own way of preparing. I'll give you an analogy. Some people like studying in the library and some people like studying around noise. It's as simple as that. I can only look back at what I would have done differently during my journey when I was preparing. I didn't take it too seriously. Probably that's all I can recall. And I was more focused on learning the theory rather than practicing the MCQs. I have a feeling that that is where I faltered and why I didn't get the rank I wanted the first attempt. The second attempt changed a lot of things because I changed the way I was preparing. The only problem we had was the pattern changed. That was not in my control. I would always advise students to practice their MCQs well, because most of your theory is done in MBBS or in surgery, wherever, depending on what exam you're taking. But I would suggest that you focus on solving as many MCQs as you can, seeing the explanation behind those MCQs, and then taking it forward from there, fixing the mistakes as you go along.
Now let's delve deeper into your residency life. How was your residency life and how was it different from your MBBS life?
MBBS is baby steps, and you have subjects over time. First year has pre-medical subjects, the second year you're introduced into clinical, and you're very excited when you're in MBBS, right? It's as it's like a child entering school for the first time. You're apprehensive, you're excited, you want to do things but you don't know how to do them. So it's a constant learning process. Come surgery or whatever course you do choose in the post-graduation phase, you know some things and you're building on it. So now it's the foundation is laid of your house and now you're just building the house. It's all up to you in that phase to learn as much as you can. Be it knowledge in terms of theory or surgical skills. And your priorities changes depending on how you're treated in your residency. If you have gone through a fairly easy life, people have been nice to you, then you tend to learn in a better environment, a calmer environment, you tend to pick up better. But if you're constantly under duress, you're being yelled at all the time, your seniors are not treating you very well, which is the stark reality of the profession we're in, then it affects the learning and it makes you harsh, it makes you tough, and it's not always a good thing. It does later add to your stress, your anxiety, and that's not something that you want in your training. Would always be better if you could have a calmer environment to learn in. You tend to learn better, you pick up more skills, you're a better surgeon at the end of it. At least that's how I look at it.
How did your day look like when you were a resident surgeon? And how did you deal with the long working hours, the pressure, the work pressure, emotional pressure that comes with it?
So I'm going to describe this in two phases of my life. One in general surgery and one in cardiothoracic. Very different, but they have certain overlaps. As a general rule, surgical residencies across the world are tough. They are demanding simply because you have to dedicate that much time to the patient. Whether it is prior to the surgery, whether it's during the surgery or after, there is always something to be done. Now, coming to general surgery, we do a various number of surgeries. It can be hernia, it can be something more complicated than that. Patient has come to you in an emergency situation. You're always on your toes, you're always running, you're always getting things done for that patient. And it's not always rewarding. And I'll tell you why. What I mean by that is not all patients make it the way you want. Some don't survive, some stay in the hospital for a long time. And that adds a certain amount of emotional trauma. Aside from that, you're doing all of this work, but you get no credit for it, or you get no recognition for it. On the other hand, there is somebody putting you down constantly. That takes a toll on you. The way to come out of this is to have a good family support, which I did. I owe everything to my parents being there behind me 100% all the time. Aside from that, I had a good friend support. Be it my co-PGs or friends outside of my profession, it always helped to just talk to them about my day, however bad it was. And I do also encourage people to just, let it out, cry, scream, do whatever you need to do to vent. You need to get it out of your system because it's not always your fault. And taking too much of a personal burden on yourself, it really doesn't help. It happens, it really happens, I agree. But at some point, you have to vent and you have to let loose. You have to find a way to come out of that. If you constantly keep staying in that mood, then you're only going to get depressed after a point. And none of that you study is going to be retained. You're not going to enjoy surgery. The whole point of getting into it is because you want to enjoy it. And if you can't do that, then none of this is worth it.
I have a follow-up question to that. Do institutions or universities offer any kind of support in this aspect to students, to the resident surgeons?
On paper, they are supposed to. Okay, it is as per the guidelines. We are supposed to have committees to cater to our mental health. More often than not, even if they exist, I think students are scared to use those services. The reason being that you are looked at as a weak person because you're seeking help for mental health. More students are worried about how they are perceived by their professors and by their peers rather than taking care of their health. That is half the reason why we dedicate more of our personal time and don't sleep, don't eat, all that, because at the end of the day, we do want someone to appreciate that we have done all that work and we want it to translate in getting more surgical chances. But it takes a toll mentally. We do it at a cost. It doesn't come free. In some institutes, they are very strict about it. There are regular counseling sessions, including the institute I'm currently working at. There are doctors that come in and speak to the students, guide them, encourage them to come up, and that works. But how many people are ready to accept that they have a problem within them? Most people don't want to acknowledge that. The problem starts there. If we normalize that people are allowed to feel tired, people are allowed to feel hungry, fatigued, and they just don't want to work that day, that will help a lot. And I think that will change the system. It starts from us. If I am able to open my mouth and say, hey, you know what, I'm tired today, I'm done for the day, can you do my share of the work? I think that will really help and change the way we treat each other. And then Professors will start treating us better. Patients will start looking at us better. I think overall the system will change at that aspect.
So, is any kind of shift happening? Like, do you see any, now that there is a lot of awareness around mental health? So, in general, so is that shift happening somewhere?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I do see a shift in the attitude. I do see a shift in more people acknowledging that they have mental health issues, me being one of them. I did acknowledge at one point that it was just too much for me to handle, and I did take a break. And sometimes just taking some time out is enough. But not everybody needs that. Some people have it worse than others. Some people are not as strong to even handle the stress, and there's nothing wrong with it. Everybody's different. It's how you handle it at the end of the day. When I say no, there's no shift, I don't think it's a drastic shift enough. We do still condone our residents, especially our juniors, that this is not the way you work. How can you be so careless? How can you take leave? How can you fall sick? More often than not, I have been accused that I'm faking illnesses. And I think, it's just a vicious cycle. Then you don't know what to do about it. You just don't want to accept that something's wrong with you. That is a problem. So while there is a shift and people are acknowledging that, the way we are treating our residents is not correct, it has to be better. It has to be in a more structured format. And once a protocol is set in place that every student has to undergo counseling once a month, or you have a mentor once a month, which actually exists. There are guidelines for that, but it's not being followed. And if that's followed more strictly, I think overall the education system can be changed, including in the medical profession.
Coming to your MCH training, so how was your MCH training different from your residency training?
So by MCH, you're a full-fledged surgeon. You're no longer a student. You are responsible for people even otherwise. This is just a stepping stone from there. So you can't look at it as a residency program in the literal sense, where you're a student, you have classes, people are sitting you down, teaching you how to do things. No, you don't know how to do surgery. You're taking that surgical skills and extending it to a specific part of the body. So cardiothoracic, otherwise, for those who don't know about it, is the heart and the lung and anything in that vicinity. So those are very vital organs in our body, and handling them with care is what we learn. We learn the techniques of stopping and starting the heart, about how to remove parts of the lung, how to take care of the part of the intestine that comes in that area, or any of the nerves, the blood vessels, any of that. All that requires lot of precision. That's what we learn in cardiothoracic surgery. So here they're no longer teaching us how to operate per se. We already know how to do that. We're just extending that to a finer part of the body, taking care about how we don't do any further damage. The worst part about cardiothoracic surgery is that it's dynamic. Patients don't give you time to respond. Patient comes into you with a heart attack. You have a few minutes to do something about it. Either starting the heart, stopping the heart, getting them into surgery, or even angioplasty for that matter, which is a surgical part of what we do. Even if it's not opening the chest up, it's still surgical. There is anatomy, physiology, changes involved. So that's important to keep in mind, and that's what we learn in our residency, which is equally taxing. No? Again, by this time you've gotten older, you're experienced, and you do have family responsibilities by this time. Most of them do. Most of them are married, have children. So additionally, you have to take on the burden of such a dynamic field, which is rigorous, and it's quite hard. So that becomes challenging at the end of the day.
Surgery is a very male dominated field, and you being a female surgeon, what were some of the challenges that you faced in this profession? And women in general, what challenges do they face in this profession, and how do you cope with it? How do you address this?
Firstly, I take offense to being called a female surgeon. I am a surgeon that's a female, and that's a huge difference. Jokes aside, it's medicine itself is a male dominated field. I wouldn't say surgery per se is separately. No, it's not true. I think more men choose this profession than women because of how taxing it is. And the system, the society works in such a way that men are supported more in terms of emotional, social, financial, but it's not the same with women. It's changed. Let's be realistic that things have changed. Looking at me sitting here in front of you saying that I'm a consultant cardiothoracic surgeon speaks for itself. Now, coming to working as a surgeon in a male dominated field, it's your perception, right? Yes, it is harder. They do look down upon you generally. And I'm not saying the men do it. There are women that look down upon women in this field. And it's quite hard. Whether it's because of competition, whether it's because of jealousy, whether it's because of ego, none of this has got anything to do with surgical skills. Let's be realistic that men do have more stamina. Let's not tide over that fact. They do have more stamina, so standing in longer surgeries, doing some of the procedures, they are naturally chosen to be stronger for that. While women have better luck with finer surgeries, fine skills, because we have tender, slender hands. That aside, I wouldn't say I'm not fit for cardiothoracic surgery. Many would. Many people would. How will you stand for so long? How will you manage your family life? I'm not married, so I have not had that problem yet. There are women that have got married, had kids, done cardiothoracic surgery, been successful at it. Comes at a cost because nobody will help you with your family life. Nobody will help you with those other aspects of being a woman that men don't go through, don't understand. Again, I think we discussed this. I said it is looked at that you're weak. Happens. Many people call you weak. You say you're having stomach pain, they say, oh, you're a woman, that's why you're doing it. It's got nothing to do with me being a woman. But it happens. Something you have to listen to. Now, the difference comes in what I do with those comments, the criticism, so to speak. I can either take it to heart, sit and cry in the corner, quit the course, sit at home. Or I can take it in stride that it is unfortunately the part of the training in India. I wouldn't say it's the same world over. Happens world over, but probably worse here. And you take it in stride and move on. Because somebody's opinion about you is not how you actually are. So just move on. It's not that easy. It's not as easy, I'm saying. And I've most days sat, cried, called my dad and said, I'm done. I'm quitting. I'm done. And I must have done that about 50, 60 times across MS and MCH. And every time they just patiently listened to me. They were like, you know what, tomorrow's going to be better. It's okay. You're good at your work. Yeah. So, yeah, male dominated again perception, but what you do about it is important.
So, from your perspective, how does a current medical training ecosystem in India look like? And what needs to change? What is working well and what needs to change?
Right now, we're very focused on bringing out more doctors rather than providing quality education. That has been an issue from some time. Another thing that I do see that needs to change is we are using very outdated techniques of training our students. Now, for example, anatomy. Previously, when we were studying, we used to have cadavers. People would donate their body to science, we would learn on them, such things. As time goes by, the number of people donating their bodies is far less. So the students actually training in most medical colleges is not adequate. Another problem I see is that there are too many medical colleges all at once. It's not possible to provide quality care like that. Rather than this, if we could focus our attention on letting out good doctors, even if they are fewer in number, then it would make more sense. Why is this happening? Why are colleges opening at an alarming rate? Is to cater to our healthcare system. Our healthcare burden is quite high. We have a lot of patients, we have always some emergencies, and every state needs good quality medical care. But you have to also train your doctors well in that. And for that, the professors have to be equipped, the infrastructure has to support all of that. Unless we fix all of this together, it's not going to happen. I also foresee in the future that when we don't have any actual human bodies to practice on, or professors being trained in anatomy, physiology, the pre-medical subjects, those don't exist. Then what do we do? There we can use 3D imaging technology and completely change the space of medical education. Can completely highlight how we can use AI or 3D imaging, get the cadavers across, teach anatomy that way, teach physiology that way, make it dynamic learning. That would really add value.
A while ago, you also spoke of precision surgery, robotic surgery. Okay, this is thinking blue sky maybe. Do you think robots and people, I mean, a lot of hospitals are employing robotic surgery, but is it possible to completely replace a human with a robot conducting the surgery? Like, do you see a future like that?
It's happening now. There is a concept of telesurgery where there is somebody sitting remotely and surgery is happening, say, in a different country altogether. But to come to your question about whether humans can be completely replaced, let's be honest that the instruction is coming from a human. Human experiences cannot be replaced by a robot.
Right.
What they have made mistakes can be taught to a computer. But how to handle that again comes from experience. Everybody has their own way of doing it. It's as simple as cooking. The way you cook, I don't need to cook the same way. Food can taste the same. The outcome can be exactly the same. It's a question of how you have experienced it, how you do the surgery. In theory, a robot can completely replace a surgeon. But what information you feed into that robot and how you tide over those complications, that you need a human.
Right.
Suppose the robot stops during surgery. It just glitches. Who comes and fixes it? And can you have an engineer continue the surgery? No. Surgeon has to be there in the background waiting for that mistake to happen for us to take over. So those kind of situations cannot be replaced by a machine.
Right.
That comes from experience, that comes from actual human touch. And what is the purpose of replacing everything with a robot? Then where is that beauty behind surgery? Where is that human connection? All of medicine is one person taking care of another person that they don't know. All this we will just lose touch. And I don't think, if it's realistically possible also, I don't think it's viable. I don't think it's smart either.
So, what, according to you, are some of the essential traits or some of the values with which a surgeon should operate with, especially when it comes to patient care while operating, or in general, when, some of the core values that a surgeon should possess?
This would be true for any doctor. Okay? Comes with empathy, not sympathy. No patient wants you to go up to them and say, "Oh, so sad, you're going through this." It's the last thing they want to hear. They come to you looking for you to fix their problems. Whether you can do it or not is a different question altogether. But when they approach you, the least you can do is be empathetic and understand what they're going through and help them in whatever way you can. Another important feature I do see of surgeons is that we should do no harm. It's not just part of our oath, it's something that we need to practice. Because somebody has come to you with a certain disease, you say there's a surgery and you just go ahead and you want to do it. You do need to consider a lot of other factors which are not purely surgical. You need to consider whether that person's fit for surgery physically and mentally. More often than not, we never ask the patient how scared they are. If they have any doubts, do we need to clear all of that? That's not taken care of. And when they come out of surgery, they're not happy. They have a lot of pain and they don't know how to anticipate it. It's as simple sitting them down before the surgery, telling them, look, this is what you're going to go through. You're going to wake up with pain. You are going to have this. You can anticipate this. If this happens, I'm going to do this. If that happens, you may die. I do explain death after every surgery. And this helps. It doesn't make them afraid. They are well prepared that, okay, they're going to do their best on me and it may go well, it may not go well. And that's okay. It's about preparing them well. empathy, along with that, being realistic about what you can do as a surgeon is very important. Doing less than more is often better.
Coming to the last question, what would be your message for the aspiring female doctors and girls who want to become surgeons?
I would ask them to go for it. You're looking at me. I'm living testament of what hard work and grit looks like. And that would be okay. Fight the man's fight. It's all right. You are no less than anybody out there, man, woman, transgender, anybody aside. It really doesn't matter. If you love it, do it, give it your 100%, and you will surely be good at it. But if you're not sure, if you cannot commit, and if you're going to make excuses for it, then it doesn't matter if you're in a man's world or in a woman's world. You're just not going to make it. So make sure when you enter MBBS, it's a good option. Let's not scare you away from it. It's a very good option. If you're committed, you'll be amazing at it. You can help so many people. You can do great things in research as well.
Residency is tough and intense, but full of growth and purpose. I hope this episode gave you a glimpse of behind the scenes. If you like such insightful conversations, do subscribe to my YouTube channel and don't forget to hit that bell icon. And if you have got any doubts related to the conversations, a conversation that we had with Dr. Amulya, you can put it in the comments below. Thank you so much.